Hello and welcome to today's session. I'm Nicole Mumford, and on behalf of CSCMP, thank you for joining us today. I have a few housekeeping items before we get started. During today's presentation, attendee lines have been muted for audio quality. We would love to hear from you throughout the event though, so please use the webinar platform to submit questions throughout the presentation. Please remember this is a CSCMP event and rebroadcast of any kind is not permitted without permission from CSCMP. Today's event celebrates Black History Month. Our panel features prominent members who are currently serving on CSCMP's board of directors, and the moderator is an academic member who's also serving as a volunteer on the EDGE Conference Committee. Today's discussion will focus on a range of topics that bring attention and recognition to the diversity that exists within the CSCMP community and industry at large. I would now like to introduce today's moderator. Dr. Felisa Higgins is Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education and Clinical Associate Professor of Supply Chain Management at the Smeal College of Business at Pennsylvania State University. Felisa describes herself as a woman on a mission to change the world, one student at a time. Felisa, thank you for leading the discussion today. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Welcome, everybody. I am besides excited today because this important topic of diversity and inclusion has been something that has gained a lot of attention, and I'm very excited that today I have three individuals that I have come to admire and respect in the field of supply chain management, and also for the role model that they represent to so many of us in the field. And I am just excited to introduce you now to our three panelists. And I want to encourage all of you at home or in your offices to please engage in the conversation by sending your questions through the question function of the webinar. And I hope that you will find today's conversation not only informative, but also inspiring. I will now ask our first panelist, Paul Brown, to introduce himself.
Hi, thank you very much, Felisa. Paul Brown. I'm the head of logistics operations for AkzoNobel North America. I have 25 years of supply chain leadership experience. I've worked in management consulting. I've worked in industry. I've done projects and assignments for organizations globally, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Paul. I will now ask Elijah Ray to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Elijah Ray, Chief Customer Officer for Sunland Logistics. We're a third-party logistics provider based in South Carolina. I've been in the industry now for about 35 years, both as a 3PL and as a shipper. And I'm also a past president of CSCMP and now participate, as you indicated, on the board as well. Great to be here with you.
Thank you, Elijah. And last but not least, Dr. Terry Esper.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed an honor to be here today. I'm Terry Esper. I'm on the faculty at The Ohio State University in the Fisher College of Business in the logistics faculty group. I am also honored to serve on the board of directors of CSCMP, currently as the secretary treasurer. And I've been involved in CSCMP my entire career. And that means I'm going on about 25 years of active engagement in industry, both in practice as well as in academia, and about that many years of active engagement in CSCMP.
All right, thank you all for your introductions. And as Nicole mentioned, my name is Felisa Preciado Higgins, and I have spent the last 14 years of my life in the education of the young future of supply chain management, but I also had experience in industry prior to joining Penn State in the consumer packaged goods sector in supply chain management across Latin America. So I'm going to start today's conversation with just really getting to the core of the theme of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because those are words that are very commonly used in today's discourse. But I want to get from you, and I'm going to start with you, Terry. What do these terms mean to you?
Thank you so much. And yeah, a great way to start this. So when you think about it, I guess if there was an analogy, you know, diversity, of course, would mean that we are intentional about ensuring that we have differences seated at the table, that there are different perspectives, different experiences, persons from different backgrounds at the table. But not only at the table, but also welcomed to participate and engage. And I think that's where the narrative of equity and inclusion come in. It's not so much to be at the table as it is about being involved and engaged and feeling a sense of belongingness at the table. And so if that as an analogy captures the essence of DEI, and hopefully that shows a little bit of the difference between just focusing on diversity, but going beyond that to focus on issues of inclusion and being equitable in that inclusion.
Thank you so much. And actually on that, I want to now call upon Elijah to tell me a little bit on how you see that connection between, diversity and inclusion. How do they relate to each other in your perspective?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. So I think it's what Terry said is spot on. Look, you can have diversity but not have inclusion, and I think it's so important that if you have a diverse workforce, you want people to feel included. You want them to feel respected, because when people feel respected, they feel more encouraged and inspired to give their ideas, to come forward. They're more productive, they're more effective in the workplace. And I think the real key there is the word respect, and so when you respect people, people feel like they belong, So I think, although the terms are related, they are different. You can have diversity, but not have inclusion, and you probably won't have diversity very long if you don't have inclusion. So you really want to create the environment where people feel included as well. And that's I think it's really important that we all understand that.
Thank you, and thank you for highlighting that when you say like you're not going to have diversity much longer if you don't have inclusion, because at some point, obviously, they rely on each other. And sometimes I think it's easy to focus on diversity only because I imagine that maybe the way we measure our progress in these areas, sometimes it's easy to tangibly quantify how we're doing in the diversity space because we can count people into little buckets. But how do we measure our progress? Paul, what do you think about in practice? When in the actual practical sense, how tangible is inclusion? How do we know we have an inclusive organization?
I think that's a great question, and I'm fortunate to work for an organization in Occidental that values that, and there are many organizations that do. I think there are a couple of indicators. We as supply chain people, professionals, we talk about leading indicators, lagging indicators. I'd say first, initially it should be visible, right? If you have a diverse organization, and this is diverse in an absolutely broad sense, ideas, identity, language, origin, all culture, all of those things are really, really important. And if an organization is diverse, first it's visible, right? As you walk the halls, as you travel, as you do what you do in your organization, number one, you'll see it. And if an organization values that, that'll be evident, not only in the numbers of people that you see, but for me, this is particularly important, the levels of authority and the roles of those folks as well. So if it's valued, as we say in leadership, then it ought to be visible among the leadership team. So an organization isn't really truly committed to diversity, in my view, if it's not visible at all levels of the organization, at all genders and identifications across the organization as well.
Thank you so much.
And Felisa, if I can add to that, I think the other thing is that visibility is driven from the top down as well. I mean, I think you see senior leaders owning diversity, and there's an environment where there's a certain amount of transparency about the whole topic and respecting people and being intentional. I think someone's already used that word, really being intentional about ensuring that diversity and inclusion takes place in that environment, and it's part of the culture. You see, you can feel the culture when it's authentic, when it's real. And it's not just something people are just trying to talk about it. to make themselves feel good, but it is actually happening in that environment.
All right, thank you. I want to go and take things a little bit back in time, because all of you share in common a very long history. I'm not implying anything about age, but you guys have been in the field for a minute. So how are we in a better place than we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago? What kind of changes have you seen in your career, and how has it impacted you and your view on this topic? And I'm throwing that one in general, but I'm going to pick on Paul. Okay, Elijah looks like he wants to jump. Let's go with you, Elijah, first, and then I'll go to Paul. Sorry.
Look, I think from a logistics perspective, I think that we've seen the awareness. There's a lot of awareness, first of all, of logistics and supply chain. 25 years ago, and to some extent, even today, there are still a lot of folks who don't know what logistics is. And as we have evolved, we hear logistics and supply chain more at the C-suite. And again, when I became involved many years ago, it was still kind of an unknown discipline. And so I'm very grateful and thankful now that as logistics, supply chain have become of age, the awareness is greater. Therefore, more people of color are entering the discipline because they now understand it. I think there's still significant gaps. As I look at the discipline, and look, one of my barometers is when I go to the conference every year. When I go to the EDGE conference, and I started going to the EDGE conference probably 25 years ago, and I would look for, I'm just being open, I would look for other African Americans, and back in 25 years ago, look, you could almost count them on a couple hands, and you would look for each other, and I look for Terry, and we talk with each other and so forth. But over the years, you've seen that grow. But when you look at conference makeup, you still see a disparity. I can see the growth of females in the discipline, tremendous growth. But because in the conference has historically been more senior level, mid-level, and then less of the junior level, entry level. And so we see kind of a disparity when I look at the conference that although it's grown, it's improved, there's still lots of opportunity for more. And again, I'm speaking African Americans, people of color, if you will, to evolve in the industry. It's getting better, but a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I would add to that. So I've been involved with CSCMP probably since the beginning of my career out of college in the mid-90s. As a person that participates in the roundtables here, as well as someone that has joined and spoken at our conferences from time to time, and really blessed to be in the vice chair capacity. If you look at the evolution of our participation over time, we've been very fortunate to have a couple of Elijah included African Americans who lead up the organization. But at this particular time, it's almost a picture in and of itself. So you have 3 African Americans on CSCMP board at the same time in a leadership capacity. First time that's ever happened. So in many ways, it's evidence of significant progress. But at the same time, you're gonna hear this term intentional come up over and over and over again. Over the last 25 years, as companies have become more and more intentional about the importance of supply chain and more intentional about diversity, right? Opportunities have opened up for us, right? But I still think if you were to measure in any meaningful way, on percentages or however you do it, what you'll find, as Elijah said, is there's still gaps. There's still tremendous opportunities for leadership, for development, and we'll get to mentorship and development and some active things we can do to start to address these gaps as we have this discussion. But I think that there's still quite a significant amount of opportunities, and the 3 of us in our capacity are acutely focused on that. Not only for CSCMP, but for our companies and the people we interface with in the industry.
Right. Good. And Paul, to piggyback on that word, Felisa, intentional, because someone at the board level was intentional about making sure this board was more diverse. We are here. We're, for the first time, as Paul indicated, there are 3 African Americans on the board, and that was because someone was very intentional about that.
Yep.
Making it happen.
Yeah, if I could also weigh in on that, I think you know, Elijah, you mentioned you know, women in the supply chain community and how we have just grown by leaps and bounds in that space.
Yep.
When you talk about intentionality, you know, I remember years ago, back when we were CLM, you know, there was Dr. Martha Cooper from Ohio State that was hosting an annual Women in Logistics session. So the reality is that while we can talk about the manifestation of those efforts over the 25 years, and we're seeing significant growth and development in that space, and we're seeing it even at the university level, with more young women interested in majoring in supply chain and logistics. But the reality is that there was a lot of work over the last 25 years to get to this level. And I think that, you know, these conversations, particularly around diversity as it relates to race and ethnicity, we've got to do that same work. We've got to sow those seeds and be intentional about ensuring that their narrative, this conversation is so important and it's so pivotal, because it is a part of that long-term work that's necessary. So we can all, you know, bask in the numbers of women in the community. But again, I think that, you know, we can't forget that there was, you know, there was a small cluster of women that would get together at the conference every year and talk about issues of pay equity and issues of entering into rooms that are male dominated and the issues that they had to face in entering into spaces. And we are now seeing the benefits of that work 25 years later. And I think we've got that same work to do as it relates to people of color.
Excellent.
Thank you. And you know, thank you first for that shout out to Martha Cooper, as somebody that I also very much respect and admire as one of those women who were among the first. And speaking of first, you guys were talking a little bit about the changes you have seen over the years. And I just thought for a moment about, you know, what I call that unexpected ambassadorship that you assume when you are the first, fill in the blank, the first woman, the first African American, the first Latino or Latina, and what that means. And it's something that you didn't necessarily ask for, but I don't know if you guys can relate to that you kind of feel a little bit of, I don't want to use the word burden, but that what you do and how you succeed would reflect on others that may look like you or have similar lived experiences. And it's something that, at least in my career, has been kind of always in the back of my mind, you know, like to not only, this is not just about you when you happen to be the first or the only blank in the room. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll start with that one, if I may. That's actually something that's in the forefront of my existence in every organization where I've worked. I cannot tell you how many times I text my wife about this. I text my kids about it. I'm the only African American. I'm the only, I look around, you know, whatever forum I'm in, I'm the only person of color in this room. You know, and in some cases, I've been in regional meetings with leaders in the companies that I work in. I'm the only African American in this room. And with that does come a sense of that burden that you did mention there, that, you know what, at the end of the day, results are results, right? And that my employees, some of my direct reports that are attending this workshop, they know I'm fully transparent in this respect. Results are results. And because I know that in many respects, the outcomes that I'm responsible for will have an effect on others who are coming along behind me, you know, we have to be able to do well at what we do. You know, we have to put in the time, we have to put in the work, we have to put in the effort, you know, to make sure that the results that we're responsible and accountable for are achieved. And in the process, make sure that we are intentional. I'm sorry to be redundant on that term, that we're pulling folks along with us, that we're developing people, that we're making sure we're developing leaders, and that we're putting them out there so that with the scope of authority that I have, delivering on and exceeding those expectations has been a consistent theme, you know, for my career, and then making sure that I bring folks along, you know, to spread them out, to spread their wings and make sure that they plant themselves, but to mentor them and to teach them how to be successful and effective in what they do, keeping in mind results are certainly important, how you get them, you know, but being collaborative, all of those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you're always on stage. You're always on stage. You know, no matter what you think is going on, you are always on stage.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good, Paul. And look, I think we have a certain responsibility, and I think that's really key, is that we have a responsibility to serve as role models. And this is one of the things that not only our industry, the world needs is role models, but we're fortunate in our profession to be role models in this discipline. And look, even the fact that CSCMP is giving us this forum to do this, 10 years ago, would they have done this or would we have done this? It didn't happen. And today, I mean, here is CSCMP, and I think it's so important that this message is such a critical message that CSCMP has come to the point of expanding the community and recognizing its position in the community as an organization who wants to reach out. This is outreach, reaching out, expand our communities to reach others. And so it's using the leaders in the organization to do just that. And for many years, although there is this sometimes silent pressure on for us to always to do well. You have to be, as Paul said, you are always kind of on your game, and people are always watching you and what have you. And I've come to the point now, and there was again lots of pressure. I've come to the point where I don't feel as, I feel responsibility, but not as pressured, but just to do it and really to be authentic and be real. And be classy about sharing your thoughts and being respectful about sharing your thoughts, being transparent. Because if we hold things in, if we're silent, then and the other word is confront. Sometimes you have to confront some things in a very positive way and talk about them in order to progress. I think one of the reasons why that we don't progress as much as we do, as we should, organizations don't progress, is that sometimes people are not as open as they should be in this space. So what we're doing now is so critical in that we're expressing very openly in a very positive way where we are and what we need to do to move forward.
Thank you so much.
And if I can also, add to that, because I think it's actually a part of what we talked about earlier when we talked about the importance of diversity and inclusion. So, you bring up a great point, Felisa, this notion of, feeling the weight of being the first of, the only of. And, in many ways, those are some of the additional layers of work-related stress that come along with being that individual. So we're in supply chain, which is already a dynamic field. It already carries its own degree of, quote unquote stress, if you will, right? And we've all been there. But the realities of the fact that for people of color and for women that might be underrepresented in certain spaces, when we get home, we not only have to unpack the stress of the work, but we also have to unpack some of these additional expectations that are layered on the work that we do. And I think having an environment where there are others that can help people, particularly younger, professionals that are, emerging in the field, to understand how to effectively navigate that, to understand how to unpack those layers, to understand that the weight of excellence, and understanding this feeling that if I am not excellent and I am the first of or the only of, what does that perhaps validate to someone that has a bias against me because I am the only? Okay. So that's a heavy weight to carry. And I think if we have environments that are more diverse and more inclusive, it gives us the abilities to call one another and to talk amongst ourselves and to help each other navigate some of those additional layers that are oftentimes hidden, that are oftentimes unspoken, but are real. They are realities for African Americans in particular, but persons of diverse backgrounds and navigating some of these environments and spaces in the industry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we have a question from the audience. The attendee is asking, I would love to hear this panel's thoughts on specific actions they would like to see people and companies take to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. What should we be doing? All caps. What do we need to do to address this, right? Where we see a lack of diversity and inclusion. So an organization that is not there, what can they do? Let me start with Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump in there. So one thing that I've been really passionate about, and something that I think I'd like to see more companies do, is really address issues of diversity and inclusion at the front line of their of the organization. I think a lot of times when we talk about these efforts, they really hover at the top layer of the organization, looking for opportunities for more persons of color in leadership positions and at the board level. And I think that work is necessary, right? But I do believe that there is a very wide open space that oftentimes, and there have been studies to show this, organizations may not cascade those diversification and inclusion efforts all the way down to the front line. Now, what this means is that we have a lot of folks that might be working, say, for example, in warehouses and distribution centers, and they might be managed by persons that might not have gotten that same level of training when it comes to the importance of inclusion. And what we also know, because the numbers are there to show it, is that, that's where there are essential workers, and typically where there are more percentages of persons of color in particular working in those spaces. And so you have a lot of folks that are working at the front line that may, be under management that may not have gotten those same levels of training and discussions around how to ensure that the workplace is more inclusive and embracing of a diverse community of people and talent. So I think that when it comes to kind of some of the things to do, I've been really talking a lot here as of late about working at the front line and really ensuring that, these narratives and discussions go all the way through the organization and they don't just hover at the leadership level. Again, I think there's important work that needs to be done there, and I'm sure we'll unpack some of that. I also think that there is a very wide open space, and there's been a lot of discussion about that here as of late.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, just to make sure, Elijah mentioned respect, and that always resonates with me. What was the name of the person that asked the question?
The name of the Michelle.
Michelle. Hello, Michelle. Thank you for asking that question. And for those that are with you out there, please submit your questions to us. Thank you for asking this first one. There are three things that I think are really important in organizations with respect to diversity and inclusion. And these are things that if you can work, partnership and collaboration is always important to achieve the outcome you want. But the first is training. There has to be a broad-based education platform, whether that's virtual. Today, lots of things are done virtually, training programs, to make sure that everyone across the organization, particularly in leadership, that they're trained to understand what diversity and inclusion really means and what diversity and inclusion doesn't mean. Make sure that people are trained to understand unconscious bias. Many times people behave a certain way based on the biases that they have that may not necessarily be conscious biases. So there's a lot of things that organizations can do in the way of training and education. Our company, AkzoNobel, is a really good one in this respect. They do broadly make sure that lots of training is done so that people understand those things that are conscious and unconscious with respect to what creates disenfranchising people, what creates that environment that doesn't feel inclusive. So that's one thing. The second thing is recruiting. Again, partnering with your HR organization to make sure that every opportunity has a truly diverse pool and that there is a commitment to hiring people from those diverse pools. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, well, we achieved our target because the pool is diverse. We really want to make sure that we're bringing in people, you know, different backgrounds. And diversity, again, for me is broad. It's not just ethnic, although we're focusing on, you know, people of color here. At the end of the day, ideas, backgrounds, languages, cultures, all of those things are important in the mix. So making sure that your recruiting program is focusing on diversity and that you're really making a conscious effort to pull those folks into the organization. And secondly, retention. Affinity organizations are really important. You know, really making sure that the organization has environments that are created, again, being intentional to make sure that people who look like you or look like me or, you know, identify the way that you identify, that those folks are supported, and that the leadership of the organization makes a statement that those kinds of environments are important. Because what Terry said is true. If you have environments where people feel like they can come together, talk to each other, share experiences, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm dealing with it, with leaders that are in the organization being a part of those activities, those are three things that I think really begin to turn organizations and cultures around if you do those things consistently.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Elijah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I'm hearing that my audio may not be as good, but hopefully I'm coming across clearly. But Paul, just great stuff. Terry, Paul, both just great stuff. I think what I will add to this is, look, I picked up a newspaper last night, and it was Wall Street Journal, and there in the center of it was an article about African Americans climbing in business and or a lack of. And in the middle of that article was a story of Walmart, and Walmart having this program where they are, you know, online education, where they are really providing meaningful education to employees who want to do more and do better. And there was this specific example where this young man who worked in the store for a number of years, an electronics salesperson, and wanted to be a manager, and had met with some barriers, but took the online course, got a degree in supply chain and logistics, and doubled his salary, loving what he is doing. And so this is a two-way street. So here's Walmart deciding that, look, this is important to us. We're gonna make sure that all the employees had to do was, I think, pay $1, and they had access to this online education. Here is this individual who says, I want to do more, I want to be more, and I want to commit, and I want to discipline myself to take in the time to learn and elevate myself. And the person did, and now they're in logistics, and they are having a great time, and they've doubled their salary. So I think those great examples.
That's actually the reason why I think that frontline narrative is so important, because it is really about creating a pipeline of diverse talent, and really, you know, thinking about how you can leverage the diversity that you currently have. And even though that diversity might be, you know, at the front line, there are ways to develop and elevate talent. And so, as opposed to this outward looking, you know, everyone is, you know, competing for a very slim number of you know, persons of color, if you will, that are in the community. Perhaps they're, you know, that, and I would say in the community that are currently credentialed with the degrees from, you know, the Ohio State University, for example, right? But there might be a small set of persons that have the current credentials, but there might be opportunities to develop talent from within. And so I think, to Elijah's example, this is one of those tangible takeaways, that it might require more of a long game. I think a lot of times when it comes to diversity and inclusion efforts, you know, we're looking for the quick hits. But what we do know is that this is tough work. It does require to really roll up the sleeves, and it's going to take some time to really see those outcomes really manifest in a meaningful way. And I think that's another part of, to Michelle's question, like, what do we do? I think we have to show a commitment and not get discouraged when we don't see immediate change when we stand up a one program.
Right.
It really takes work. We're really talking about, in many cases, Paul talked about biases. We're talking about making persons aware of sometimes biases that they may not know that they have.
Right.
We're talking about, you know, just really deep-rooted perspectives and opinions about things. And you know, it's a lot of work. And so ultimately, I think that a big part of what we can do is just recognize that all the things that we talked about here are not things that are going to lead to immediate wins that are significant and you know, you're going to shift the culture that immediately. It's going to take some time and really investments, investing in time and energy to really make that meaningful change that we're all hoping for.
Yeah.
You know, that's interesting that you looked at the time frame in which these efforts can bear fruit, because Michelle actually had a follow-up question where she asked about the responsibility that current leadership may have to accelerate those changes. Like, you know, if based on the conversations we're having nationally and internationally, it seems like we're a little bit further behind than we thought we were. And now, you know, there is a focus on how quickly can we get to where we need to be? And so Michelle's question is, you know, what responsibility does leadership have to make these changes happen, you know, sooner rather than later? Is there a burden to act with urgency, given the nature of what we're seeing and talking about today as a nation and in the world?
Let me, if I may, Elijah, please, I'll defer.
Go ahead, Paul.
Is
Go
that
ahead.
okay? I mentioned earlier metrics. You know, we're supply chain folks. We're all about metrics, right? I agree with Michelle's premise on the urgency. Quite honestly, I don't think the urgency is new. I don't think recent events have made it more urgent than it's always been. I just think that recent events have emphasized and accentuated problems that have always been there, quite frankly. For me, what I like to see in organizations, and Michelle, I don't know, obviously, the organization that you are a part of, but the things that I see is companies measure what matters, right? Organizations measure what matters. And if an organization says something is important, generally you're going to see some action and initiative behind it to see that it happens. If top line growth is deemed important, you're going to see actions that evidence top line growth is important. If margin growth is important, you're going to see evidence of that. If cost reduction is important, you're going to see evidence of that. If diversity and inclusion is important, you know, we can't have metrics over here and not have metrics over here, right? So I think it's really important for organizations to accelerate, to Michelle's point, by having clear measurables around what we want to achieve from a diversity and inclusion perspective, how we're going to measure and evaluate it to make sure that it's working. And then those same continuous improvement Lean Six Sigma programs that we use across all of our plants and all of our organizations, let's bring some of those same ideas into how we look at DE&I and make sure that it's effective, that it's achieving what we intend for it to achieve. And then finally, make sure that we're getting feedback from our internal and our external community to validate, are we doing what we said we would do? Right. For me, I think those things are really important with respect to acceleration.
Yeah. Look, I think again, Paul, just spot on. A couple points that I would add. Look, one of the most important things I think I've learned as a professional is having emotional intelligence and having empathy, and being able to be self-aware. And to have humility and be able to really try and be intentional about understanding who others are. And when you do that, when you really make it, especially as a senior leader at that top level, to look at what's happening in our environment and say, and realize that sometimes you have blind spots, and to say, look, I want to really open up my mind, and I really want to make sure that I'm respecting the environment, respecting the people who work with me, who don't look like me, and I'm respecting them. And I think that's a first step for senior leaders, is to do that, because once they do that, and once we all do that, we create that environment for others to come along as well. And that's where I think, in fact, unfortunately, in the last year, we've seen more emphasis there, and it's because CEOs and many of those senior leaders are starting to say, look, we need to do something about it, and we're seeing lots of action. I think the other part of it is as well is building some awareness. For example, in logistics, there are people who work in warehouses who, when you walk out into a warehouse, the people who are operating forklifts, who are order picking, and who get promoted to a team leader or beyond that to a supervisor, who really don't know that they are part of a very dynamic, very progressive discipline, a profession where if you do well, if you educate yourself, if you keep your nose to the plow, there are some great things that you can do, you know, in this discipline. And I think building that awareness and educating people to that end so that they know what lies ahead, I think that's another opportunity as well. So this whole idea of awareness, like for example, if there are young professionals or maybe people who are still at that where they again become team leaders and they've now been promoted to supervisor, and they're thinking, look, there are these African Americans who are on this panel and they're talking. You know, the one message I would send is that there is just tremendous opportunity in this discipline. When you look at what's happening across the landscape of logistics and supply chain, and the whole narrative around e-commerce is creating these large warehousing facilities where lots of individuals are being hired in these buildings, in these facilities, and then there's upward mobility. And I think raising your level of expectation that you can be bigger than, you know, not that this is wrong. It's okay to be a supervisor, but guess what? I can be a manager. I can be a director. I can be a vice president if that's what you aspire to, and what you need to do to educate yourself to get to those levels, to prepare yourself to get to those levels. So I think, and it's the reason why I started that conversation with the senior leader being having empathy and having the humility and the desire to respect the individuals and where they came from, and to help them, is because that's where it started. In fact, I'm a product of that, where, you know, I work with someone who did not look like me at a very early age. He looked over into my character. He looked over into my work ethic and said that, look, you can do great things. I'll never forget, when I got my first bonus as a mid-level manager, I'll never forget this as long as I live. Here's a poor guy from the South who gets his first bonus, and this guy, my boss, says, get used to it. He said, you deserve it. You know, and that's the type of leadership I think is so important, is to help that young person say, you deserve it. You work hard. You've contributed. You've been successful. And you deserve it. You know, you work for it. You earned it. And I think to have that type of mentor who can do that for you and can also share with you and show you the ins and outs and be there for you and support. In fact, in that article last night that I was reading, I had no idea that article was there a day before this, and the article was talking about the number of people who get to senior, well, who aspire to senior levels and don't feel like they have the support, and they reach this ceiling that they can't go further because they don't feel like they have the support. And I think that's where senior leaders have to really open their eyes and their minds and give that support.
Thank you so much.
Can I offer something else? Because I think Michelle's question about this urgency is just so important. You know, one of the things that I have really been really suggesting that we have to be careful about in this moment. because we are seeing a lot of discussions about diversity. And of course, this was stimulated by the events of this past summer of 2020, and a lot of companies sitting up straight and saying, hey, it's time for us to really address this head on. My concern, however, is that these diversification and inclusion initiatives are in many ways couched as a response to the need to address a social issue.
Right.
Yes.
I think, as Paul suggested, we've got to think about this as it relates to performance. And I think that's the thing that we need to be particularly careful about here. The reality is that the case for diversity and inclusion is not one so much about making people feel better about, you know, the people they work with. That's a byproduct of it. But the reality is that when it comes down to it, this is about making a better organization, and that better organization yields better outcomes. You know, not to get too academic here, but the research is there to show that diverse teams outperform teams that are not diverse. It has been shown in so many different contexts, and it has been shown in so many different scenarios that diverse teams outperform those teams that are not diverse. The data is there. So this is not so much about creating a work environment where we have a lot of diversity for the sake of diversifying, because that's the social narrative of the day. This is about diversifying so that we can produce better outcomes. And why are those outcomes better? Well, the research has shown that when the work environment is more diverse, people feel the need to really lean in more. It's, you know, making decisions. We're less inclined to fall into the groupthink scenario. We make much better, well thought out decisions that are evaluated from different perspectives and from different lenses and based on different experiences, and that leads to better outcomes. And so again, I think that at this moment we have to be careful not to, you know, there are social conversations right now in this country that really bring this narrative to the forefront. But the reality is that if we're really going to, you know, build a sense of urgency, that has to be built around the performance implications, the fact that we can yield better outcomes by embracing a more diverse work environment and a diverse workforce.
May I chime in? One quick thing, Felisa, on this, please. I know we got to get to the next question, but I want to build off of that. Two things. One, successful businesses are businesses that embrace this, period, full stop. This is not just, to Terry's point or Elijah's point, it's not about just a social mandate. There is an economic viability, going concern mandate to build diverse organizations. What Terry said is absolutely true. And one of the best books on the subject, if I could just recommend, I have one of my mentors, he said, leaders are readers, readers are leaders. You know, so these cliches stick in my head. But one of the best books that I've ever read on the subject that really puts it in a business context, I think it's probably translated into 25 languages now, is called The Medici Effect by Dr. Franz Johansson. The Medici Effect. If you really look at what happened that spawned the Renaissance, to put it simply, it was diverse groups of people from all over the world brought into one place, sponsored by people with resources, the Medici family in particular, who were also, well, I won't give you the spoiler, but they brought all of these people together from all over the world, sponsored them in what they did well, and the Renaissance was born out of that. Right. So companies that bring people together and value exactly what Terry was talking about do outperform their competitors. It's a fact. And that book really makes a case across a variety of spectrums to prove it.
Thank you. And actually, I would just stretch that just a little bit beyond not just the results, which, like Terry said, the research is there, that on the ROI of building diversity into your teams. It's also looking at what you want the future of your organization to be. I mean, there have been studies about how organizations that have more inclusive environments tend to be more highly preferred by those that are looking for employment. And if we're seeing a growth for the need of talent in supply chain management, and given that millennials and Generation Z are the most diverse generation in the history of this country, if you are not thinking about how your organization is not only going to build that diversity, but support it and also engage it, you are not going to be around, in a sustainable way in the future. So it's about also the very survival of the organization. So it's not, like you said, not just diversity for diversity's sake, but the case is very strong also about this being also a competitive advantage and the future of organizations in the business space. So thank you for sharing that. Now we are getting close to the end of our chat, and there is a word that has been mentioned multiple times, and we haven't really gotten into much, which is the word mentor. And I just want to get from each of you, do you have, I don't know, something you would like to share with the audience about your experience with mentoring, either being a mentor or being mentored by someone?
Yeah.
And
I'm happy to start. Yeah. Never one to miss an opportunity. No, to be very clear, this is foundational to everything that's happened in my career. Absolutely foundational. And it starts with really one individual who I mentioned to Nicole as she was putting this together, Dr. James E. Bostic. Jim, he went by Jim. He was the first African-American to earn a PhD at Clemson in chemistry. He went on to be a White House fellow, a White House intern, and ultimately, when I came across Dr. Bostic, he was the executive vice president for governmental affairs at Georgia Pacific. And he made a point, and always has since and before, to develop everyone around him, particularly minorities. He's the greatest mentor of minorities that I've ever seen. He created an environment because he had the authority and the empowerment of the organization to do it. He had the track record outside the organization to support it. And he made a point of creating an environment at Georgia Pacific to develop and mentor people. And he was very intentional about seeing his mentees grow in the organization. There are CEOs, executives across the country now that were mentees of his, including a couple of other folks that mentored me, but all of that goes back to him. And a couple of the things that were really important. Yes, you have to put in the work. Yes, you have to apply yourself, but you have to have people to train you, help you navigate, help you understand the norms, the mores, the ways to navigate the organization that you're in, the industry that you're in. And he was very intentional about all of that. And so if you want to grow, as one of the attendees that are on this particular call today, mentorship is really important. If you're in a leadership position, find a way to mentor other people. If you're on this call and you're wondering, trying to find a mentor, seek one out in your organization or seek one out in your industry, become a part of CSCMP. It's an incredible network, a lot of really, really wonderful people. We invite you to become members of CSCMP if you're not, and we can help you. We can, there are people within the organization that really genuinely care. I'm talking to people that are in college, level right now that attended our conference who wanted to know and ask questions of a practitioner. It's really important to have a mentor.
Yeah, I would just add to that, especially as we're talking about diversity and inclusion. I mean, as Paul suggested, the mentorship is just something that we just cannot overlook. It is so pivotal. And, when I was in industry, the vice president of operations for the company that I worked for, not too long after I joined the team, said, hey, go and talk to this guy, Pete Burney. Pete Burney was my mentor when I worked at Hallmark Cards. He was assigned to me. Pete at that time was, climbing the ranks some years ahead of me, but he was assigned to me. And we've used this term. They were very intentional about making sure that I spent time with Pete and that Pete was there to serve as a mentor to me, to not only help me to be a better hallmarker, but also to navigate the realities of a growing and a budding career as an African American. When I studied for my PhD, I studied under Dr. Lisa Williams, the first African American woman with a PhD in logistics, and she poured into me in some very unique ways. And I've been blessed with phenomenal mentors. And I think that the goal here, or the takeaway, is that as a part, back to Michelle's question, like, what do we do? Be very, when you hire young talent that are people of color, that might be young women, don't feel be very intentional about aligning them with people that can pour into them and develop them in that space, and making sure that there are mentors to guide talent and to speak to their entire existence, not just the work existence, but to speak to their individuality and some of the issues that they may face as an African American or as a person of color, for example, and providing them with mentors. And if you don't have them internally, find them in the field and in the community through CSCMP and other mechanisms to ensure that there are persons that can speak into them.
Thank you. Elijah.
Yeah, great. Yes, great, guys. So look, I referred to this person a few moments ago, but I remember this boss. His name is Bill Gates, not the Bill Gates, but the Bill Gates of warehousing. And I remember working with him early in my career, and I had an issue with getting in front of a group of people and talking. I was just afraid of getting in front of a group of people and talking. And he mentored me to the point of saying, let's go take a Dale Carnegie course. And we did that. He and I did that together. We did it together. I took that course, and it was actually the same guy who introduced me to CSCMP. Back then it was CLM, the same guy. And he said, you really ought to get involved, and get involved with the local roundtables, because then that's an opportunity for you to get in front of the group and speak to the group or what have you, and then you develop that confidence. And I think confidence is a really important word, because when you start to respect people and show them that you respect them, they start to have more confidence in themselves. And when people have more confidence in themselves, they do better, they are more effective. And that gets back to organizational performance. That's why those organizations outperform, because they feel respected in their space. That guy continued to mentor me, and I will never forget this. Here I am involved with CSCMP, CLM, and then after being involved with the roundtables for a number of years, there was someone who was one of the pioneers of CLM, George Jekowitz, who actually invited me to be on this board, the CSCMP, back then it was CLM's board, and I was scared to death. We had Harvard guys on it. I mean, all these professionals, and after being there for a year or a couple years, and I thought, you know what, I'm pretty comfortable here, but the bottom line is that you get around these people who, Terry, you'll know Tom Mincer. You remember that name, Mincer. Mincer was one of the board members at that point, and then I found myself, on the stage in front of 5,000 people as part of the programming to speak to 5,000 people. I had a script and had a teleprompter, and I'm glad I did. But back to that young man who was afraid to speak in front of people, with that mentor now, following that mentor, and I end up on the main stage at the Organization for Logistics, the largest association or organization for logistics in the world, and then to be here with all of you where you are, and to be able to share with the audience as we are doing. It speaks for itself. Mentorship is critical. It is. I can't say enough about it. It's a must.
Thank you so much. And I want to say, first of all, to our audience, we have received such a wonderful, large number of questions. I want to apologize that we were not able to get to all of your questions, but I will work with the rest of the team here to find a way to try to reach out with some of the more pressing answers to your questions. And I thank you all for participating. I also want to thank the panel. Elijah, Paul, Terry, you have made my day. You have made my year, my next 20 years. And in a way, just hearing your words have made me feel refreshed and inspired. And I hope that those of you who joined us today also feel the same way. And again, all of you who are at home and in your offices tuning in, I hope that this timely discussion, our field is in the middle of, lots of growth and lots of opportunity, and the future is bright and is diverse. And in any way that CSCMP can be there for you to support growing our base of different individuals from different backgrounds and cultures represented in this wonderful field of supply chain management, I think that the more of us, we will continue to make progress forward. So again, Terry, Elijah, Paul, from my Panamanian heart to yours.
Great.
Gracias. And thank you, everyone.
Great.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you,
And thank
Felisa.
you,
Great job
Alexander.
moderating. Thanks, everybody.
All
See
right,
you all.
thank you.
Thank you.